I've got the drawing done in marker here, but this is just to show you what my drawing looks like beforehand. My actual drawing is quite faint. So I put this here to show you what the lines are underneath that I've got. Because I don't want to make my lines too dark on my watercolor paper, because it can be hard to erase them. Okay, so what I'm going to start off with is I'm going to paint both leaves with a light green color. So our first color, I'm going to take some vermilion yellow here. I'm going to add a drop of water to that. I'm going to rinse my brush, and I'm going to take my lighter blue, so my cobalt blue, and add just a little bit of that. And that's going to give me, that's a little too light. I'm going to add a little bit more blue. I'm going for a light yellowy green color. Okay, that should do. So I always use a test sheet because it's hard to tell what color you have unless you test it out. So the other thing, I'm going to add a little bit more water than usual on this one, because I want it to be fairly faint. So with my number 6 brush, I'm going to go ahead and paint both of my leaves. So this is just going to be the first layer. So in watercolor, we paint fairly quickly, as if we stop partway through and chat for a while, then we'll end up with a hard edge where we stopped. And when I get to those points, I put the point of my brush in towards the point. And that's my first leaf painted. Okay, so I'm just going to paint the other leaf out as well. So in watercolor, we have to wait, if we're doing multiple layers, we have to wait for our first layer to dry. So while this layer is drying, we'll mix our other color, and we can also work on our berries. Also, you'll notice in this photo, I've got a white arrow and a red arrow pointing at different leaves. So the white arrow is pointing at the leaf that I used for a reference for this leaf. And the red arrow is pointing to a leaf that I used as a reference for the leaf on the right hand side. So I just kind of took the picture and switched the leaves places to set up my own composition. And the berries, you'll notice I haven't done them 100% accurately, but I've given them a feel of berries. The important thing for the berries is having a highlight, a light spot. I'm going to start with Aurelian yellow here. Add a little bit of water. And some of you will have French ultramarine blue, some of you will have Prussian blue. I'm going to use Prussian blue. Now I'm going to see where I'm at. That's pretty good dark green. You can use it just like this, or you can add a little bit of crimson to it. Crimson is opposite on the color wheel. I'm going to stick this over here. So if I just add a touch, it'll make that an even darker green. It won't be quite as a bright green. So it becomes a little bit darker when you add that touch of red. Okay. So while we're waiting for the leaves to dry completely, we're going to work on the berries. So for the berries, we're going to use alizarin crimson. And normally I make a well of alizarin, but today we're just going to go full strength into the alizarin. But first you want to make sure that your brushes are clean. So you wipe them off, get them wet and wipe them off in a paper towel. So for this exercise, I'm going to use a number 3 brush and a number 6 brush. So with my water, I always have one water that's clean, fresh water, and one water that I use when I'm mixing. And I try not to mix those up so that I always have clean water to draw from. Doesn't always work that way, as you guys know. Okay, but I do have clean water right now. So I'm going to wet my first berry, and if you're right-handed, it's good to work top to bottom, left to right. If you're right-handed, then you would work right to left. There is water on this brush, but it's not totally soaked. So I'm just going to wet my first berry here, and then I'm going to go in with my number 3 brush. So I just wet my number 3, and I'm going to go right into my crimson, which, like I say, I don't normally do, but we want it to be quite strong in this case. And my highlight, I want to be on the top left. So I'm going to paint around, leaving a highlighted area. I'm going to grab some more crimson. On the left hand side. So there's one berry. Easy as that. I know it doesn't always work out easily. Some issues that people have are having too much water at this stage. So I'll do this berry now. So I'm going to wet it first. I'm going to go in with my number 3 brush and the alizarin crimson. And I didn't make these berries touch because if they were touching, they would bleed into each other when I painted them, and I didn't want them to. So I just made them separate. This one I've grabbed more alizarin crimson, so it's a lot stronger. So what I can do is I can go in with what we call a thirsty brush. So it's moist, but it's not totally wet or totally dry, and pick up some of that paint. Okay, now I'm going to do my 3rd berry. So I'm going to wet my berry here. And I'm going to go in my crimson. And paint a backwards C essentially. Except for I am going to close in that circle. Leaving that highlight space. So while it's wet, I can play. When it's dry, I have to go away. So I can push the color around a little bit with my brush. There we go. So now we have 3 berries. So, for my green color, using the photo as reference, so this left one, I'm looking at the white arrow to see where the lights and darks are. So, for this one, I'm going to clean off my brushes and make sure that red is off of my brushes. So I get my paper towel and make sure that red is off the brushes. And I'm going to use my number 3 brush to grab the green here. And I'm going to start putting the darks in. So, oh, and the other thing to mention is the line down the center, that's going to be where the vein is. So I'm going to paint up to that line, but I'm going to leave a space on the other side of that line so that there's a bit of light green showing through. Another thing I'm going to try to do is I could keep a little bit of the light green along the edge, but that's a little more tricky and it doesn't make as much of a difference. So if you want to paint right up to your edges, feel free, but it's good to leave a vein down the center. Okay, so I've got my number 3 brush. I'm going to leave a little bit of space between the edge. So I'm going to paint one little section like this. And then I'm going to take my number 6 brush, and I'm not going to have it totally wet. I'm going to take some of the water off of it, but I'm going to tease into that edge. So I'm bringing some of that paint out, softening that edge. So we have a hard edge on the outside, but on the inside we have a softer edge. And it's doing it this way is not a usual way for me, as many of you will know. It sort of ends up with a bit of a stippling effect, but that's okay because the holly leaf has some texture, so it's totally fine. So now I'm going to carry on, and I see in the leaf that there's some dark green around this one as well. So I've got my number 3 brush. I'm staying away.
I had to leave you for a few minutes.
Okay.
And I come back, and I haven't touched a darker green. What do you?
Okay. So
you just adding blue to the green that we had?
You could just add some. I mixed up new, but you could just add some Prussian or some French ultramarine blue to the green you already have. You could do that, yes. And you can also add a little bit of, just a tiny, tiny bit of crimson to tone the color down a bit and make it a little bit darker.
All right. White blue. Huh.
Do you have, which blue, dark blue do you have?
Oh, I've got, try to look at them because they're old.
You probably have French ultramarine blue.
I have cobalt blue for sure.
Yes.
I have another one that says, blue, but I don't know what it is. Just a minute, let me look at it. See. If I wet it, I can maybe tell. Oh, it's a nice dark.
Okay. That would be good to add then.
Okay.
I'm going back into my dark green. And I'm doing one little section at a time. It's quite dark here at the base. So I'm essentially looking where the darkest of the darks are, putting my dark green there, and then using my number 6 brush, not super wet, but a little bit wet, and teasing at those edges so I don't get a hard line. Once I do it once, I rinse off my brush, pat it a little bit drier, come back and do that some more. So I'm going to sort of stipple it right to the center line. Okay, so I've done the top. Now I'm going to do the other side. So when I do the other side, I'm going to leave a little bit of room for the vein to show through. So a wet brush, but not a really wet brush. I'm going to tease into that edge. My brush is, if it's a little too wet, it'll start blossoming. going to add some more color here. So notice how I'm leaving the center just below the vein line open so that I'll end up with a vein there in the end. And I'm going to carry on to this little section. And then go in with my other brush.
Laurel, are you painting the dark green on a dry paper or have you wet it first?
I'm painting it on dry, and then
Okay.
I'm quickly going in while the dark green is wet and,
Okay. And
stippling.
okay, great.
Okay, so into my dark green, and in the reference photo there's a lot of dark green at the bottom here. So you see, again, I'm leaving space for the vein. And I'm going to go in with a somewhat wet, but not totally wet. It's good to turn this around sometimes. Sometimes it's easier to work upside down. And when I see I have too much green coming in, I wet my brush and dampen it off again. I could use a bit more green in here, so I'm going to go back in over here and add some more dark over here. So having such strong highlights help give this a realistic look. So as soon as I start bringing it down, I see that I sometimes have too much green on my brush, and that's when I'll rinse my brush and get less green on my brush. But I have a little tiny bit of green left, and I'm using that to fill in the rest of the space. Okay, I'm fairly happy with that one. I'm not totally happy though. I think it'll look better if I add more green here. I'm not quite adjusting for my bigger, I did this leaf first, I'm not quite adjusting for the bigger leaf here. I'm not quite giving it enough. So now with my number 6, that's wet but not really wet. And when I'm doing the stippling, I'm trying to go in the same direction of the leaf, so kind of this direction. There, that looks better. Just looking at the berries for a second, you'll see that the highlights have worked out well. Sometimes your paint will fill up those highlights, and you have to get your paper towel in there to bring the highlight back again. But the berries I've done here have worked out well, so that's good. All right, so now for our other leaf. We've got dark section here. It's good to do a little section at a time, because it'll dry on me and I'll get a hard line there if I don't get in there right away. So with my brush damp, I'm going to tease that edge there so that it doesn't turn into a hard edge. And I'll bring that color out towards the center. And again, I'm coming right up to that center line, but I'm not going past it, because I want to leave a vein there. Okay, so our next dark section is here. So paint where you see it the darkest. And then switch to your other brush, and with it damp but not super wet, I'm going to tease that edge, do some stippling right up to that line but not over it. I'm trying to make it smooth along this line. Okay, for our next dark section, I'll go in with my number 3 brush. And then switch to my number 6. And I'm going to turn it this time so I can get at it easier. Okay. So on this side, Here's a dark area here. And then pull at that edge with my number 6. Keeping in mind that I want to leave a vein in the middle. It might help to draw a second line along the middle so you know to stay away from it. Okay. Now this one has dark on this side, close to the vein in this section. So I'm going to paint that in. I like just putting one line for a vein. Because then I don't have to worry about being right up against 2 different lines. I can just be up against one line and leave my own amount of space. Just going to add a little bit more green over here. And I'm going to add more green here as well. Just got too much open space here. Okay. So one more step, and that is we need to mix a brown for the tips of this, the holly leaves. So all we do for that is we take burnt sienna, take burnt sienna, and you mix it with a little bit of neutral. We'll go with a bit more neutral. So those two together will give you a dark brown. Just like that. Right there is a dark brown. And once everything's dry, I know this one's dry for sure over here, then you just add the little spiky ends to, this would be good to have your number 1 brush. instead of your number 3. But if your number 3 is quite pointed, then that works as well. So just add the little spikes on the end of each point. Then the only other thing you have to do is sign it. And I like to sign with this. It's a Micron 03 archival ink pen. The signing with watercolor is a pain. So something small like this, I just use Al Best. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed today.